Okay, so this is a demo of what I'm going to call a lateral pin tumbler, I don't know, model, example, training aid. Basically, the idea behind it is that when you're picking a lock, or getting started picking locks, it can be a bit tricky to visualize how different types of security pins bind, and what's actually happening when you're pushing them up. And cutaways are nice, but when they cut away on a side profile, you kind of lose some of the detail, especially with things like spools, as to what's actually going on in the core. It's actually a lot better, I think, to get a front-on cutaway view. And obviously, if you do that with a normal pin tumbler lock, then you can really only do it for the first pin. If you keep going, you're going to break the lock. So my idea was to then, instead of doing that, to think about how we could slice out a pin tumbler lock, pin chamber by pin chamber, lay them out side by side, and then have them still working in the same way that a regular pin tumbler lock would work, which is what I've done here with this little 3D printed model. So if you imagine if this was a 3-pin lock, just imagine that these are stacked one in front of the other, and that these little rotating bits are all linked together, and it should be functioning pretty much the same way. And then what this bar here does is it pivots on these little push pins, and allows all the discs to rotate, but locks them together as well. So what I can do now is I've laid this down on the table. If I put my 2 fingers here and pull down on this bar, that's going to tension all of these discs, which are functioning as the barrel of a lock. So I've pushed down on this chamber, and now I can start testing my pins to see what's binding and what isn't. If I push up on this spool chamber, nothing is happening at all. If I push up on this chamber with the serration, it sets. Then it's rotating the spool chamber the wrong direction. Which is the one problem with this crappy little fabric-hobbled model, is that things don't rotate in the exact proper direction that they should. But we've set pin 1, and then we go to pin 2 and try and push it up as I awkwardly get between my 2 fingers here, and feel that it's very stiff and binding, and then boom, it pops into place. And then the last part, and this is where I think this model does really well, is it shows you the front-on view of what's happening with a spool pin. And we can see that the chamber is rotated and it's trapped in the middle section of the spool, and it's binding. And if we go in and now start pushing up on this pin, we can actually see counter rotation as well as we push up on it. It's not the best using these little like crappy plastic 3D printed parts, because they're obviously not smooth. So the movement's very, very crunchy. But as we push up on it, we can see that, I probably need to hold that in place a bit. Yep, there we go. We can see that sort of happened a bit too quickly, but it pushes back on the lock, the spool pops into place, and then all the chambers are now freely rotating. So you can actually, can't remember if I can do, yeah, I can do a 360 rotation with this, so we can see that now the chambers are moving freely. And we can do a 360. No, I don't think I could do a 360. That's fine. I've bent one of the pins out of place. But if we rotate it now back into its original placement, and obviously also ideally you would have springs on the top of these pins to push them back down. At the moment, I'm sort of just using friction and sometimes gravity, but I don't actually have any springs that fit behind here that aren't like super, super stiff and make the thing impossible to pick. But yeah, that's how the model works. There's obviously a lot of improvements to be made with it. Once I've fixed my 3D printer, I'll probably have another go at printing a nicer model. But yeah, that's how it works. I think it's quite neat. Obviously not super useful for anybody who already knows how to pick a lock. But I think it's a great little example tool for showing people how different types of pins bind, and what's really going on when those pins are rotating, in a format that's more, I guess, akin to an actual normal lock, as opposed to just doing sort of single pin front on cutaway views. Like there's a great set of animated GIFs that show how different pins work in the chamber, but this is sort of like an interactive model that you can use, and you can swap these pins out for different types of security drivers and security top pins. But yeah, that's it. I think it's neat.